The recruitment center on station, Gamma 7, buzzed with activity as beings from across the galaxy lined up to join the Unified Defense Corps. Towering, Krillians with their chitinous armor gleamed under the artificial lights, while sleek Vorthak slithered through designated channels, their crystalline bodies refracting rainbow patterns on the walls. At the far end of the hall, a small group of humans stood quietly, their pale skin and modest stature making them appear almost fragile compared to the other species. Commander Zexhai observed the proceedings from his elevated platform, his four arms crossed in contemplation. As the station's recruitment officer, he had processed thousands of applicants from hundreds of worlds. Most species brought obvious advantages to the Corps. The Krillians were living tanks, their natural armor capable of deflecting plasma bolts. The Vorthak could phase through solid matter for reconnaissance missions. The gas-breathing Nethri excelled in zero-atmosphere combat. But humans? Zexhai's mandibles clicked in confusion. Their homeworld was a death trap by galactic standards, with crushing gravity, violent weather, and an atmosphere that was barely breathable for most civilized species. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. Their technology was primitive, their military tactics crude. Yet here they were, volunteering for service alongside species that had been waging interstellar warfare for millennia. The first human in line approached his desk. The creature stood barely reaching Zexhai's shoulder, wearing a simple green uniform with strange markings. A small cloth patch on his chest read U.S. Army Special Forces in their primitive script. The human's eyes were an unusual blue color, and despite his small frame, he carried himself with an odd confidence. Name and specialization, Zexhai rumbled through his translator. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, United States Army Green Berets. Special Operations, Unconventional Warfare, and Counterterrorism. The human replied crisply. Zexhai's secondary eyes studied the creature's file on his display. The information was sparse compared to other species' detailed genetic and enhancement records. No mention of psionic abilities, enhanced strength, or environmental adaptations. Just a list of conflicts on their homeworld with names that meant nothing to him. Previous combat experience, 12 years active duty, tours in Afghanistan, Syria, and the Sahel region, multiple classified operations. The commander's confusion deepened. These were all locations on the human homeworld, suggesting their species was still fighting amongst themselves rather than focusing on external threats. How could such a divided primitive race contribute anything meaningful to galactic defense? The Corps requires soldiers capable of engaging Vorlak raiders in the Outer Rim, Zexhai explained, his tone becoming dismissive. These enemies possess advanced weaponry, personal shields, and genetic enhancements that make them formidable opponents. They show no mercy to captured prisoners and consider lesser species to be food sources. The human's expression didn't change. Understood, sir. Do you comprehend what I'm telling you, creature? Zexhai's voice carried a note of irritation. We're not discussing your primitive tribal conflicts. The Vorlak have conquered 17 star systems. They dissolve captured enemies alive for sport. A soft species like yours would be slaughtered within minutes of first contact. Something flickered behind the human's eyes, but his voice remained steady. I appreciate the briefing, Commander. Are there any other requirements for enlistment? Zexhai leaned back in his chair, all four arms spreading in a gesture of disbelief. Throughout the hall, other species had stopped their conversations to observe this exchange. The Krillian warriors chittered amongst themselves, their translator devices producing sounds of amusement. Even the normally silent Vorthak seemed to be paying attention, their crystalline forms pulsing with what could only be interpreted as curiosity. Requirements? Zexhai repeated. Young human, the requirement is survival, something your fragile species is clearly incapable of achieving against real warriors. The commander stood, his impressive height towering over the small human. Around them, the recruitment center had grown quiet as dozens of alien eyes focused on the confrontation. Zexhai decided to make an example of this presumptuous creature, to demonstrate why some species were meant for combat and others for more. Domestic pursuits, perhaps, he said, his voice carrying across the hall. You should return to your homeworld and find work more suitable to your species' limitations. Farming, perhaps, or serving as labor for your betters. The human's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his rigid posture. Sir, I'm here to volunteer for military service. If you're questioning my qualifications, I'm happy to demonstrate them. A ripple of actual laughter passed through the assembled aliens. The Krillians' chittering grew louder, and even some of the more reserved species seemed to find humor in the situation. HFY felt his confidence growing. This would be an excellent opportunity to educate these humans about their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. Demonstrate? He scoffed. Very well, little creature. Show us what Earth's finest warrior can accomplish. The commander gestured to a nearby training area, where holographic targets materialized. Standard military assessment protocols initialized, creating scenarios designed to test reflexes, tactical thinking, and combat effectiveness. The difficulty was calibrated for Krillian recruits far beyond what any unenhanced human should be able to handle. As the human walked toward the training zone, HFY felt a surge of satisfaction. Within moments, this presumptuous creature would be eliminated by the first wave of holographic enemies, and the other humans would understand their place. Perhaps they could find useful employment as technicians or clerks, safely away from real military operations. The holographic environment activated, instantly surrounding Staff Sergeant Chen with a simulated Vorlak raiding scenario. Multiple enemies materialized from various directions, their weapons charging with lethal intent. According to the system's calculations, even a Krillian warrior would struggle with this particular configuration. HFY settled back to watch the human's inevitable failure, already composing the speech he would give about knowing one's limitations and accepting appropriate roles within galactic society. Around him, the alien recruits pressed closer to observe what they assumed would be a brief and educational demonstration. The first holographic Vorlak raised its plasma rifle, targeting the small human figure standing alone in the center of the training zone. What happened next defied every assumption HFY had made about human capabilities. The moment the first holographic Vorlak appeared, Staff Sergeant Chen moved with a fluid precision that seemed to bend the laws of physics. He didn't run or take cover as expected. Instead, he flowed through the training space like liquid mercury, each movement calculated and economical. The first plasma bolt seared through the air where the human had been standing a microsecond earlier. Chen had already rolled beneath the energy beam, coming up behind a piece of cover that hadn't even been there when the simulation started. Somehow he had reposited debris from the holographic environment to create tactical advantages. HFY's 4 eyes widened as he watched the human engage multiple enemies simultaneously. The creature's movements were unlike anything in the Corps' tactical databases. Where Krillian warriors relied on their natural armor to absorb damage, and Vorthak used their phasing abilities to avoid attacks entirely, the humans seemed to predict where each shot would be fired before the enemies even pulled their triggers. A Vorlak raider materialized to Chen's left, weapon already charging. The human spun, not away from the threat but toward it, closing distance before the creature could acquire a proper targeting solution. His hands moved in a complex pattern that somehow redirected the alien's aim while simultaneously striking what appeared to be pressure points on the holographic being's anatomy. The combat simulated Vorlak collapsed, its weapon clattering away, and Chen had already moved on to the next threat. Throughout the training area, more enemies spawned according to the program's escalating difficulty curve. The system was designed to overwhelm even enhanced soldiers through sheer numbers and tactical complexity. But the human treated each new challenge as simply another variable in an equation he was already solving. When 3 raiders surrounded him in a triangular formation, he didn't try to fight all 3 simultaneously. Instead, he used the first attacker as a shield against the second, while positioning himself to strike the third. The movements flowed together so seamlessly that it looked almost choreographed. Commander HFY found himself leaning forward, his earlier smugness replaced by growing bewilderment. Around the training area, the other alien recruits had fallen completely silent. Even the normally chattering Krillians had stopped their commentary, their mandibles hanging open in shock. The simulation escalated again, introducing aerial threats and environmental hazards. Energy weapons began firing from elevated positions while the ground beneath Chen's feet became increasingly unstable. The program was now operating at levels intended for veteran Krillian Special Forces units. Chen adapted instantly. When the ground began to collapse beneath him, he used the falling debris as stepping stones to reach higher elevations. When aerial drones began strafing his position, he somehow turned their own crossfire against ground-based enemies. Every disadvantage became an advantage in his hands. Every obstacle transformed into a weapon. But it wasn't just the human's physical capabilities that astounded the observers. His tactical thinking operated on a level that seemed almost supernatural. He would begin moving to counter threats that hadn't even manifested yet, as if he could see several moves ahead in some cosmic game of strategy. A particularly challenging sequence activated, featuring a hostage rescue scenario that typically required entire teams to complete. Multiple Vorlak raiders held simulated prisoners, while others provided covering fire from entrenched positions. The tactical solution required careful coordination, specialized equipment, and significant time to execute properly. Chen completed it in under 3 minutes. Alone. He moved through the enemy positions like smoke, neutralizing threats with minimal force while extracting prisoners who didn't even realize they were being rescued until they found themselves in the designated safe zone. The holographic enemies never managed to raise an effective alarm or coordinate a proper response to his infiltration. Zexhai's translator struggled to process the sounds of amazement coming from the assembled aliens. Several species were attempting to record the demonstration with their personal devices, while others were rapidly consulting their military databases to find comparable tactical performances. None existed. The simulation reached its final phase, designed to be absolutely impossible for individual completion. A massive Vorlak command ship materialized in the training space, its weapon systems targeting not just Chen, but the rescued prisoners behind him. The scenario required protecting multiple objectives while simultaneously conducting an assault against overwhelming odds. For the first time since the demonstration began, the human paused. He stood perfectly still for perhaps 2 seconds, his head tilted slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he smiled. What followed couldn't properly be called combat. It was more like watching a master artist paint with violence as his medium. Chen moved through the command ship's defenses as if they were merely suggestions rather than lethal obstacles. He turned the enemy's own systems against them, used their weapons to destroy their shields, and somehow managed to capture the vessel while simultaneously ensuring the safety of every simulated prisoner. When the holographic environment finally deactivated, Chen stood alone in the center of the training area, barely breathing hard. Around him lay the evidence of what could only be described as a perfect military operation. Every objective achieved, every enemy neutralized, 0 casualties among friendly forces. The recruitment center remained absolutely silent for several long moments. Then slowly a sound began to build from the assembled aliens. It started as a low murmur from the Krillians, joined by harmonic resonances from the Vorthak, and gradually swelled to include vocalizations from every species present. It was the galactic equivalent of applause, but underlaid with something else entirely: respect, and perhaps the first stirrings of genuine fear. Staff Sergeant Chen walked calmly back to Commander Zexhai's desk, his expression unchanged from when the demonstration had begun. "Are there any other questions about my qualifications, sir?" Zexhai found himself staring at the small human with completely new eyes. The creature before him was not the primitive, fragile being he had assumed. This was something else entirely, something that had evolved not on a peaceful world with natural advantages, but in the crucible of constant conflict and struggle. Around them, the other human recruits waited patiently in line, their own expressions revealing nothing. How many more of these deceptively dangerous creatures were there? What kind of world produced soldiers capable of such devastating effectiveness? And perhaps most disturbing of all, what did it mean that such beings were volunteering to fight alongside the galaxy's other species rather than against them? Commander Zexhai struggled to process what he had witnessed as Staff Sergeant Chen returned to his position. The alien commander's 4 hands trembled slightly as he accessed his terminal, pulling up the human's file once more. The sparse data seemed to mock him now, each unremarkable entry hiding depths he had completely failed to recognize. "Your demonstration was adequate," Zexhai managed, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Around the recruitment center, conversations had resumed in hushed tones as various species processed what they had observed. The Krillians were gesticulating excitedly with their chitinous arms, while the Vorthak had formed tight clusters, their crystalline bodies pulsing in rapid patterns that indicated intense discussion. Chen remained at attention, waiting for the commander's decision. Behind him, the other humans in line maintained their patient stance, but Zexhai noticed something he had missed earlier. Each of them carried themselves with that same subtle confidence, that same alertness that spoke of constant readiness for violence. They weren't farmers or laborers seeking adventure. These were all warriors shaped by whatever brutal forge had produced the creature standing before him. "Tell me about your homeworld," Zexai said, his tone now carrying genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. "What kind of environment produces soldiers of your caliber?" A brief smile crossed Chen's features. "Earth is what we call a death world, Commander. Gravity nearly twice galactic standard. Weather systems that can level cities. Predators evolved specifically to hunt thinking beings, and that's before you consider the other humans." "Other humans? We've been at war with ourselves for our entire recorded history," Chen explained matter-of-factly. "Every major technological advancement we've made was driven by the need to kill each other more effectively. When we finally achieved global communications, we used it to coordinate larger conflicts. When we reached orbit, we immediately began planning how to drop rocks on our enemies from space." Zexai felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. "But surely your species has evolved beyond such primitive conflicts." Chen's expression grew distant. "Commander, in the past century alone, humans have killed over 200 million other humans in various wars. We've developed weapons capable of sterilizing our entire planet multiple times over. We've fought in every conceivable environment, from the bottom of our oceans to the upper atmosphere, in deserts that would kill most galactic species in minutes, and Arctic wastelands where the cold alone is lethal." The commander's terminal chimed softly, displaying additional data that his security clearance had just unlocked. As he read, his confusion deepened into something approaching horror. Earth's military history was a catalog of increasingly sophisticated methods of mass destruction. Their weapons development had progressed from sharpened sticks to nuclear arsenals in the span of just a few millennia. "These conflicts you mentioned," Zexai said carefully. "Afghanistan, Syria. How long did they last?" "Afghanistan saw continuous warfare for over 20 years in just the most recent conflict," Chen replied. "Some regions of that country have been contested territory for centuries. Syria's civil war involved at least 12 different factions, each with their own objectives and methods. The Sahel region deals with ongoing insurgencies that have been active for decades. Around them, other alien species had begun gathering closer to overhear the conversation. A Krillian warrior named Thekvar stepped forward, his massive frame dwarfing the human but his posture oddly respectful. "Human warrior," Thekvar rumbled through his translator. "You speak of warfare lasting decades. Surely you exaggerate. No species can sustain such prolonged conflicts without collapsing." Chen turned to face the Krillian, and Zexai noticed how the human's eyes automatically cataloged potential threats and escape routes, even during casual conversation. It was the behavior of someone who had never truly left the battlefield. The longest continuous war in human history lasted approximately 116 years. Chen said simply, "The 100 Years' War between England and France. And that was just one conflict among many happening simultaneously across our planet." Thekvar's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "Impossible. The resources alone would bankrupt any civilization." "War became our primary economic driver," Chen explained. "We invented entire industries around the production of weapons and the logistics of destruction. Some of our most advanced technologies were developed specifically for military applications, then adapted for civilian use afterward." A Vorthak named Silanth materialized beside them, her crystalline form shimmering with agitation. "Such prolonged violence would surely eliminate the weak from your population, leaving only the most aggressive individuals." Chen nodded grimly. "Natural selection on Earth favored traits that increase survival in high-stress, dangerous environments. Humans who could think quickly under pressure, who could adapt to new threats, who could form effective combat units with strangers, who could endure physical and psychological trauma and continue fighting. Those are the ones who lived long enough to reproduce." Commander Zexai found himself staring at the recruitment line with new understanding. Every human waiting there wasn't just a volunteer soldier. They were the products of millions of years of evolution in an environment that killed anything, not perfectly adapted for survival, followed by thousands of years of cultural development that treated warfare as the highest form of human expression. "But surely," he said, his voice almost pleading, "your species must have some concept of mercy, some restraint in combat?" The change in Chen's expression was subtle but unmistakable. The professional courtesy disappeared, replaced by something cold and predatory. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones that made Zexai's exoskeleton itch with primitive warning signals. Commander, mercy is a luxury we extend to enemies who surrender, and civilians who pose no threat. But when something threatens what we're sworn to protect, we respond with whatever force is necessary to eliminate that threat permanently. Around them, the alien observers had grown very still. Even the normally aggressive Krillians seemed to sense that they were in the presence of something far more dangerous than they had initially understood. What we're offering, Chen continued, is the opportunity to point that capability in the same direction as your other forces, to make the galaxy's enemies our enemies, and to apply the lessons we've learned from 10,000 years of warfare against anything that threatens the peace you're trying to build. Zexai realized that his earlier assumption had been exactly backward. The humans weren't seeking to prove themselves worthy of joining the galactic community. They were offering to share their most terrible gift with species that had never truly understood what warfare meant. The question was no longer whether humans could contribute to galactic defense. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for the consequences of accepting their help. 3 months after the recruitment incident, Commander Zexai found himself aboard the UDC battlecruiser Vindication, preparing for what military analysts predicted would be the largest Vorlak offensive in galactic history. Intelligence reports indicated that over 300 enemy vessels were massing in the Kepler sector, led by War Chief Gorthak the Merciless, whose forces had never suffered a defeat in 40 years of raiding. The human contingent had been assigned to the ship's Special Operations Division, much to the initial dismay of the veteran alien crews. Most galactic military doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and technological superiority. The idea of deploying small teams of unenhanced biologicals against advanced alien raiders seemed like tactical suicide. Zexai made his way through the ship's corridors toward the Special Operations briefing room, passing groups of Krillian shock troops conducting equipment checks and Vorthak infiltrators practicing their phase-shifting techniques. The atmosphere was tense but confident. The Vindication carried enough firepower to devastate entire fleets, and her crew represented the finest warriors from dozens of worlds. As he approached the briefing room, raised voices in multiple languages caught his attention. Through the translucent aluminum viewport, he could see what appeared to be a heated argument between the ship's tactical officer, a Krillian named Vexthor, and several of the human operators. Zexai activated the door controls and stepped inside to find Staff Sergeant Chen and his team gathered around a holographic display showing the expected battle zone. The humans were studying enemy formations with intense concentration, while Vexthor gestured dramatically with all 4 of his arms. "This is completely unacceptable," Vexthor was saying. "You cannot simply ignore established tactical doctrine and insert yourselves into active combat zones without proper support." Chen looked up from the display, his expression calm but firm. "With respect, sir, our mission parameters don't require heavy support. Small unit infiltration behind enemy lines to neutralize command and control structures. It's what we do. What you do." Vexthor's mandibles clicked furiously. "You primitive creatures wouldn't last 5 minutes against Vorlak battle armor. Their personal shields can deflect plasma rifle fire. Their warriors stand 3 meters tall and can lift a Krillian with one hand." Another human, whose uniform identified him as Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez of something called Navy SEALs, spoke up. "Size isn't everything in a fight, sir. Sometimes being smaller means being harder to hit. And if their shields can stop energy weapons, we'll just have to use something else." Zexai noticed that Rodriguez was casually cleaning what appeared to be a primitive ballistic weapon, its metal components gleaming under the ship's lighting. Several other humans were performing similar maintenance on archaic-looking equipment that seemed almost museum pieces compared to the advanced energy weapons carried by other core soldiers. "Commander Zexai," Vexthor said, turning as he noticed the recruitment officer's arrival. "Perhaps you can explain to these humans why their proposed mission is impossible. They want to assault the Vorlak command ship with nothing but chemical explosives and kinetic projectile weapons." Zexai studied the tactical display, noting the proposed insertion points and mission objectives. "You intend to board War Chief Gorthak's flagship directly?" "Yes, sir," Chen replied. "Intelligence indicates the Vorlak fleet operates on a strict hierarchical command structure. Eliminate the leadership and the raiders will lose coordination and retreat to regroup. Classic decapitation strike. But the command ship is protected by multiple escort vessels and defensive systems, HFY protested. Even if you could somehow penetrate their defenses, Gorthak himself is reportedly enhanced with cybernetic implants and chemical augmentations. He's personally killed over 50 enemy champions in single combat. A third human, wearing the insignia of something called British SAS, looked up from his equipment check. Sir, enhanced or not, he still bleeds. And if he bleeds, we can kill him. The casual confidence in the human's voice sent an odd chill through HFY's exoskeleton. These creatures spoke of assault impossible odds the way other species discussed routine maintenance procedures. Master, Chief Rodriguez finished cleaning his weapon and locked the action with a sharp metallic click. Commander, we've reviewed the intelligence on Vorlak biology and tactics. They rely heavily on intimidation and superior firepower to overwhelm opponents. Most galactic species either surrender immediately or engage in conventional fleet actions that play to Vorlak advantages. But humans have experience fighting enemies who use similar tactics, Chen added. Asymmetric warfare against technologically superior forces is something we've been doing for centuries. The principles are the same whether you're fighting an occupying army or alien raiders. Vexthor threw his arms up in exasperation. This is exactly the kind of primitive thinking that will get you all killed. Modern warfare requires coordination, proper equipment, and overwhelming force. Staff Sergeant Chen stood slowly, and something in his movement made the entire room grow quiet. When he spoke, his voice carried the same cold undertone that HFY remembered from the recruitment center. Sir, with respect, modern warfare is what we've been practicing on Earth for the past century. Industrial-scale killing with weapons that can level cities. But sometimes the best way to stop an enemy isn't to match their firepower. Sometimes you need to get close enough to put a knife between their ribs. The human reached into his equipment kit and withdrew a blade that looked almost primitive compared to the energy weapons surrounding them. But as HFY studied its design, he recognized the subtle engineering that had gone into its creation. Every curve and edge was optimized for a single purpose: efficiently ending life. The Vorlak expect their enemies to engage them in space battles where superior technology determines the outcome, Chen continued. They don't expect small teams to infiltrate their flagships and hunt them through their own corridors. They've never faced an enemy that specializes in turning every advantage against itself. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. Plus, our weapons have certain advantages their defenses aren't designed to handle. Energy shields work great against plasma bolts, but they don't stop a bullet traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Cybernetic implants enhance strength and speed, but they also create electromagnetic signatures we can exploit. The British SAS operative, whose nameplate read Thompson, added his own perspective. And when it comes to close quarters combat in confined spaces like ship corridors, being smaller and more agile beats being large and heavily armored. We can move through areas their warriors can't even enter. HFY found himself studying the humans with growing fascination. Where other species had adapted to galactic warfare by enhancing their natural advantages, humans had instead learned to exploit their weaknesses as strengths. Their small size became stealth capability. Their primitive weapons became unexpected threats. Their lack of natural armor forced them to rely on intelligence and tactics. Very well, he said finally. But you'll need support getting to the command ship. Even human capabilities have limits. Chen smiled, and HFY realized it was the first genuine expression of warmth he had seen from any of the human soldiers. Thank you, sir. All we need is insertion. Once we're aboard their ship, we'll handle the rest. As the briefing continued, HFY began to understand that he wasn't observing a desperate suicide mission. He was watching predators plan a hunt, using methods refined through millennia of warfare against equally dangerous prey. The galaxy's enemies were about to learn what humans meant by no mercy. The battle began exactly as military analysts had predicted. 300 Vorlak vessels emerged from hyperspace in a perfect formation, designed to maximize their technological advantages. War Chief Gorthak's command ship, the Bloodthirster, positioned itself at the center of the fleet like a predator surrounded by its pack. Commander HFY watched the initial engagement from the Vindication's command bridge, monitoring tactical displays that showed the enemy advance with methodical precision. Vorlak raiders had refined their approach over decades of successful campaigns. First, they would demand surrender while demonstrating overwhelming firepower. When that failed, They would systematically destroy defending forces with superior weapons and armor. Captain Veltar, the Vindication's commanding officer, studied the enemy formation with professional interest. Standard Vorlak deployment. They're counting on our forces engaging them in conventional fleet action, where their shield generators and heavy weapons provide maximum advantage. Around the bridge, alien crew members prepared for the kind of space battle that had become routine in galactic warfare. Energy weapons charged to full power, defensive screens activated, and fighter squadrons prepared for launch. It would be a brutal but familiar engagement, with victory going to whichever side could bring the most advanced technology to bear. But Zexai found his attention drawn to a smaller display, showing the progress of the human infiltration team. While the main fleet prepared for conventional combat, Staff Sergeant Chen and his operators were approaching the battle zone in a barely detectable stealth pod, their primitive equipment somehow invisible to Vorlak sensors designed to detect advanced galactic technology. The irony wasn't lost on him. The galaxy's most sophisticated military forces were about to engage in a traditional technological arms race, while a handful of humans planned to end the battle with knives and explosives. Enemy fleet is broadcasting surrender demands, reported the communications officer, a Vorthak whose crystalline form pulsed with transmitted data. Standard Vorlak terms. Unconditional surrender. 50% of defending forces to be processed as food sources. Remainder to be enslaved. Captain Veltar's response came through gritted teeth. Signal the fleet. All ships engage at maximum range. We'll show these raiders what happens when they threaten civilized worlds. The space between the two fleets erupted in brilliant displays of directed energy as hundreds of vessels opened fire simultaneously. Plasma bolts and particle beams crossed the void while defensive screens flared under bombardment. It was warfare on a scale that dwarfed anything in human history, with individual weapons capable of devastating entire cities. Initially, the battle proceeded exactly as expected. Vorlak shield technology proved superior to Corp's weaponry, while their heavy assault ships pressed forward through the defensive fire with minimal damage. Several Corps vessels were forced to withdraw as their defensive systems overloaded, and it became clear that conventional tactics would result in another Vorlak victory. But Zexai's attention remained focused on the smaller display tracking the human team. Their stealth pod had somehow penetrated the outer defensive perimeter and was approaching the command ship's docking bay. According to the mission timeline, they would begin their assault within minutes. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "Vorlak forces are advancing on schedule. Our defensive lines are holding, but they're taking significant damage. At current rates of engagement, we'll be forced to withdraw within the hour." Captain Veltar nodded grimly. "Maintain current course. All ships continue engagement." The Vindication shuddered as enemy fire found its mark, overloading secondary shield generators and causing minor hull damage. Around the bridge, damage control teams rushed to repair systems, while the ship's weapons continued their bombardment of enemy targets. Then, without warning, everything changed. The first indication came from the Vorlak fleet itself. War Chief Gorthak's flagship, which had been maintaining perfect formation while directing the battle, suddenly broke away from its escort vessels. Its weapons fell silent, and the ship began an erratic course that suggested something was seriously wrong. "What's happening to their command ship?" Captain Veltar demanded. The communications officer's crystalline form pulsed rapidly as he analyzed incoming signals. "Sir, we're detecting internal explosions aboard the Bloodthirster. Multiple secondary detonations, massive power fluctuations. They appear to be suffering catastrophic systems failures." On the tactical display, the human team's transponder signals showed their progress through the enemy vessel. They were moving through the ship's corridors with impossible speed, neutralizing resistance and destroying critical systems as they advanced toward the command center. "How is this possible?" Veltar whispered. "The Bloodthirster is heavily defended. It should take hours to fight through their security forces." Zexai found himself remembering Chen's demonstration at the recruitment center, the casual efficiency with which the human had dismantled holographic enemies designed to challenge veteran Krillian warriors. But this was different. This was real combat against enhanced alien warriors in their own environment. The answer came through intercepted Vorlak communications, translated by the ship's computer systems. Emergency broadcasts from the command vessel painted a picture of chaos and terror that defied comprehension. Unknown enemies have breached the ship, came the first report. Security teams 3 through 7 have gone silent. The intruders appear to be small bipedal creatures using primitive kinetic weapons. Impossible, responded another voice. Primitive weapons cannot penetrate our battle armor. They're not trying to penetrate it, came the panicked reply. They're targeting weak points, joints, sensory organs, anything not covered by armor plating, and they're moving through maintenance shafts and service tunnels we can't access. More reports followed in rapid succession, each one describing tactics that seemed designed to exploit every weakness in Vorlak military doctrine. The raiders were used to fighting enemies who would meet them head-on, matching strength against strength and technology against technology. They had no experience with opponents who used stealth, misdirection, and intimate knowledge of their enemy's psychology. Security Team 9 is reporting that the intruders are using our own defensive systems against us. Another voice transmitted. They've somehow turned our automated turrets to fire on our own forces. How many enemies are we facing? Demanded what sounded like a senior officer. Unknown. They appear to be everywhere at once. Strike teams report engaging them in multiple locations simultaneously, but the intruders seem to anticipate our movements. Captain Veltar stared at the tactical display in amazement. How many humans are aboard that ship? Zexai checked his records. 12, sir. A single squad. The bridge fell silent as the implications of that number sank in. 12 unenhanced humans were systematically dismantling a vessel crewed by over 3,000 enhanced Vorlak warriors, using nothing but primitive weapons and tactics that predated galactic civilization. Then came the transmission that changed everything. War Chief Gorthak himself appeared on the communication display, his massive form enhanced with cybernetic implants and chemical augmentations that made him a walking engine of destruction. But his expression showed something no Vorlak warrior had ever displayed in combat. Fear. All Vorlak forces, he broadcast, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding presence. These creatures are not natural. They fight without honor, without mercy, without any regard for their own survival. They are demons given physical form. In the background of his transmission, sounds of combat echoed through the command ship's corridors. Sharp cracks of ballistic weapons mixed with explosions and the screams of dying Vorlak warriors. They killed my personal guard by targeting their breathing apparatus. With surgical precision, Gorthak continued. They bypassed our shield generators by crawling through ventilation systems. They turned our own weapons against us and used our dead as cover for their advance. The transmission cut to static as another explosion rocked the command ship. When it resumed, Gorthak's image was distorted and his voice carried a note of genuine terror. To whatever species spawned these nightmares, he said, I offer unconditional surrender. Call off your demons before they consume us all. The surrender transmission from War Chief Gorthak sent shockwaves through both fleets. Across 300 Vorlak vessels, warriors who had never known defeat struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Their legendary commander, the architect of 40 years of successful raids, was begging for mercy from creatures he described as demons. On the core side, the reaction was equally stunned. Captain Veltar stared at the communication display where Gorthak's terrified face had appeared moments before. Did he just surrender his entire fleet to 12 humans? Commander Zexai checked the tactical readouts, confirming what seemed impossible. The human team's transponder signals showed them advancing steadily through the Bloodthirsters' command section, leaving a trail of disabled systems and neutralized resistance in their wake. What should have been a suicide mission was proceeding exactly according to their schedule. Sir, the communications officer reported, we're receiving surrender broadcasts from multiple Vorlak vessels. They're requesting immediate ceasefire and permission to withdraw. But even as the enemy fleet began to break formation, the situation aboard the command ship continued to deteriorate. Intercepted Vorlak communications painted a picture of systematic destruction that defied every assumption about modern warfare. The demons have reached engineering, came one panicked transmission. They've disabled our hyperdrive without destroying the ship. They want us alive but helpless. Security teams report the intruders are herding our forces into designated areas. Another voice added. They're not trying to kill everyone. They're controlling the ship room by room. Zexai realized what the humans were doing. They weren't conducting a typical military assault designed to destroy the enemy. They were executing a capture mission, systematically neutralizing resistance while preserving the vessel and its crew for interrogation. It was a level of tactical sophistication that most galactic species couldn't achieve with their best technology and largest forces. "Commander," Captain Veltar said, "I need to understand what we're witnessing. How are 12 humans accomplishing what would normally require an entire battalion?" Before Zexai could respond, a new voice joined the Vorlac communications. This one was calm, professional, and speaking accented galactic standard, with what the computer identified as human vocal patterns. "War Chief Gorthak, this is Staff Sergeant Chen of the Unified Defense Corps. Your vessel is now under our control. Order your remaining forces to stand down and assemble in designated areas for processing." The transmission included video feed from inside the Bloodthirsters' command center, and what Zexai saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The bridge was intact but clearly under human control. Vorlac officers sat with their hands secured behind their backs while 2 humans in primitive-looking armor maintained overwatch positions. Gorthak himself stood in the center of the bridge, his massive form dwarfing the humans around him but his posture utterly defeated. Despite his cybernetic enhancements and chemical augmentations, despite being bred specifically for combat, he had been captured by creatures a fraction of his size using weapons that barely qualified as advanced technology. "How?" Gorthak asked, his voice barely audible through the transmission. "How did you penetrate our defenses so easily?" Chen stepped into view of the camera, and Zexai noted that the human showed no signs of fatigue despite having just fought through an entire enemy warship. His equipment was still precisely organized. His movements remained fluid and controlled. "War Chief," Chen replied calmly, "your defenses were designed to stop enemies who fight the way you fight. Energy weapons, heavy armor, direct assault tactics. But humans learned long ago that the best way to defeat a superior enemy is to make them fight on your terms instead of theirs." He gestured to his equipment, which looked almost primitive compared to the advanced technology surrounding them. "Our weapons use chemical propulsion and kinetic energy. Your shields were never designed to stop them. Our armor is lightweight and flexible, allowing us to move through spaces your warriors can't access. Our tactics emphasize stealth and misdirection rather than direct confrontation." Gorthak's massive head shook in confusion. "But your species is primitive. Your technology is barely advanced enough for interstellar travel. That's what made us dangerous," Chen explained. "Every other galactic species advanced by building better versions of the same basic concepts. Better shields, stronger weapons, faster ships. But humans advanced by constantly changing the rules of engagement. When our enemies developed armor, we invented better ways to pierce it. When they built fortifications, we learned to bypass them entirely. Around the Bridge of the Vindication, alien crew members listened to this exchange with growing comprehension. The humans hadn't won through superior technology or enhanced abilities. They had won by approaching the problem from directions their enemies couldn't anticipate. Master Chief Rodriguez appeared in the transmission, efficiently directing the securing of captured equipment. "Sir, the ship is ours. All resistance neutralized, no human casualties, minimal enemy fatalities. We're ready to begin intelligence gathering." The casual nature of this report sent another chill through the watching aliens. 12 humans had just captured the most powerful warship in the Vorlac fleet, without losing a single member of their team. They had accomplished what an entire core battle group would struggle to achieve, and they were treating it as routine procedure. "War Chief Gorthak," Chen continued, "you're going to provide us with intelligence on Vorlac military capabilities, base locations, and future operational plans. Your cooperation will determine how we treat your crews and whether your fleet is allowed to withdraw intact." For a moment, Gorthak remained silent, his enhanced physiology visibly struggling with the reality of his situation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of genuine bewilderment. "What kind of species produces warriors like you?" Chen's expression became distant, and when he answered, Zexai heard echoes of their conversation at the recruitment center. "A species that never had the luxury of easy victories, War Chief. Every conflict we've ever fought was against enemies who wanted to completely destroy us. We learned to win because the alternative was extinction." The human paused, studying the captured Vorlac commander with clinical interest. "Your species developed superior technology and used it to intimidate weaker civilizations into surrender. But humans developed superior tactics because we were usually the weaker civilization. We had to become very good at killing things bigger and stronger than ourselves. Captain Veltar turned to Zexhai, his expression mixing awe with concern. Commander, I need to know. Are all human military units this effective? Zexhai consulted his personnel files, reviewing the records of the other human soldiers who had enlisted. Rangers, SEALs, SAS, Spetsnaz, and dozens of other designations that meant nothing to galactic databases, but apparently represented different specializations in the art of warfare. Sir, he said slowly, according to their records, the team aboard that ship represents only a small sample of human military capabilities. They have entire armies trained in these techniques. The implications of that statement settled over the bridge like a heavy blanket. If 12 humans could capture a Vorlak flagship, what could 12,000 accomplish? What about 12 million? For the first time since humanity had requested admission to the galactic community, the other species were beginning to understand exactly what they had invited to join their civilization and whether they were ready for the consequences. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Sector, Commander Zexhai stood once again in a recruitment center, but this time the situation had completely reversed. Instead of aliens questioning human capabilities, representatives from dozens of species were requesting human military advisors. The small recruitment station had been replaced with a massive facility, processing thousands of applications daily. The humans had delivered on their promise in ways that exceeded even Zexhai's expanded understanding of their capabilities. The intelligence gathered from the captured Vorlak fleet had led to the systematic dismantling of the largest raider network in galactic history. More importantly, word of the Bloodthirsters' capture had spread throughout the criminal underworld, fundamentally changing how pirates and raiders approached their targets. Commander? His aide, a young Krillian named Kextol, approached with a datapad full of requests. The Altarian Defense Ministry is asking if we can provide human instructors for their Special Forces training program. The Centauri Republic wants to hire human mercenaries for a counterinsurgency operation, and the Vegan Trade Alliance is offering exclusive mining rights in exchange for human protection of their shipping lanes. Zexhai reviewed the request with growing concern. The galaxy's response to human military effectiveness had been typically pragmatic. If humans could accomplish impossible missions, then everyone wanted to hire them. But he was beginning to understand that the implications went far deeper than simple mercenary work. What's the status of the human integration program? He asked. Proceeding ahead of schedule, sir. Human advisors have been assigned to 17 different military commands. Their tactical innovations are being studied at the War College, and several species are requesting permission to modify their equipment based on human suggestions. But even as he spoke, Kextol's mandibles clicked with uncertainty. Sir, there have been some complications. Zexhai wasn't surprised. What kind of complications? The humans keep suggesting modifications to standard operating procedures that make other species uncomfortable. They want to train soldiers to fight in ways that many consider dishonorable, targeting non-combatants who support enemy forces, using enemy casualties as psychological weapons, conducting operations designed to terrorize rather than simply defeat opposing forces. This confirmed Zexhai's growing concerns about humanity's integration into galactic society. The humans weren't just effective soldiers. They were products of a military culture that had developed concepts of warfare most civilized species found disturbing. There's something else, sir, Kextol continued. We've received intelligence reports suggesting that several human military units are conducting unauthorized operations in the Outer Rim. Apparently, they've been hunting down remaining Vorlak cells without official sanction. Before Zexhai could respond, familiar footsteps approached across the facility's main floor. Staff Sergeant Chen walked toward them with the same controlled precision he had displayed months earlier, but now other species moved respectfully out of his way. His reputation had preceded him throughout the Corps. Commander, Chen said, offering a crisp salute, I understand you wanted to speak with me about recent developments. Zexhai gestured toward his office, leading the human away from the crowded recruitment floor. Once they were seated privately, he activated privacy screens and turned to face the small creature, who had somehow become one of the most famous soldiers in galactic history. Sergeant Chen, I need to understand something about human military doctrine. The other species are becoming concerned about some of the methods your people consider normal. Chen's expression remained neutral. What specifically concerns them, sir? The concept of total warfare. The idea that enemy civilian populations can be legitimate military targets. The use of psychological operations designed to break enemy morale, rather than simply achieving battlefield objectives. For a long moment, Chen was silent, and Zexai recognized the same distant look he had seen during their first conversation. When the human finally spoke, his words carried the weight of historical experience. Commander, most galactic species developed military traditions during periods of relative stability. Their wars were fought between professional armies using agreed-upon rules and limited objectives. Victory meant forcing the enemy to negotiate, not destroying their ability to continue fighting. Chen leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes focusing intently on Zexai's face. Human warfare developed differently. For most of our history, losing a war meant extinction. Complete destruction of our cities, enslavement of our populations, elimination of our culture. Under those circumstances, any method that increased our chances of survival became acceptable. But surely, Zexai protested, there must be limits to what civilized beings consider acceptable in combat. There are, Chen agreed. Humans do distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. We protect prisoners of war and civilians who aren't supporting enemy operations. But when something threatens the survival of our species or our allies, we respond with whatever force is necessary to eliminate that threat permanently. The human's voice carried the same cold undertone that had characterized their first meeting. But now Zexai understood its significance. It wasn't cruelty or bloodthirstiness. It was the voice of someone whose species had learned that mercy toward enemies who showed no mercy in return was simply another form of suicide. The unauthorized operations in the Outer Rim, Zexai said carefully. Are your people conducting vendetta killings against former Vorlak forces? Chen shook his head. No, sir. We're conducting counter-terrorism operations against cells that are planning attacks on civilian targets. Intelligence gathered from the Bloodthirster indicated that losing their main fleet would cause the Vorlak to shift to asymmetric tactics. Bombing space stations, poisoning colony water supplies, targeting refugee ships. And you decided to stop them without authorization from Corps Command? Sir, those cells were planning to kill millions of innocent civilians. The time required to get proper authorization and organize official responses would have allowed them to carry out multiple attacks. So we took initiative. Zexai felt a chill of recognition. This was exactly the kind of thinking that made humans simultaneously valuable and dangerous as allies. They didn't just follow orders and execute assigned missions. They identified threats and eliminated them using whatever methods were most effective, regardless of political considerations or bureaucratic procedures. How many unauthorized operations have your people conducted? He asked. Chen consulted a device on his wrist. 47 successful raids resulting in the elimination of 19 separate terrorist cells and the capture of approximately 300 enemy combatants. No civilian casualties, minimal collateral damage. All captured intelligence was forwarded to appropriate Corps departments. The casual way Chen reported these statistics was almost as disturbing as the numbers themselves. Human military units were essentially conducting their own war against galactic terrorism, achieving results that official task forces had struggled to match. Sergeant, Zexai said slowly, I think it's time for the galaxy to understand exactly what kind of allies we've gained. Would you be willing to address the Defense Council directly, to explain human military doctrine and capabilities to the species commanders? Chen nodded without hesitation. Of course, sir, though I should warn you that some of them might not like what they hear. As they prepared to leave the office, Zexai reflected on how completely his understanding of humanity had changed since their first meeting. The small, seemingly fragile creatures he had initially dismissed were actually the products of the most unforgiving military tradition in galactic history. They were warriors who had learned to win wars against impossible odds because losing meant extinction. But perhaps most importantly, they were offering to use those terrifying capabilities in defense of civilizations that had never needed to develop such methods themselves. Whether the galaxy would accept that offer with all its implications remained to be seen. But Zexhai now understood that the question was no longer whether humans deserved to join galactic civilization. The question was whether galactic civilization was ready to become as dangerous as the threats it faced, and whether humanity's gift of merciless efficiency would prove to be salvation or damnation for them all.